Hi, I'm Heather Staines, a senior consultant at Delta Think and one of the Charleston Conference directors. I'm here today with Ivan Oransky from Retraction Watch. Hello, Ivan. How are you?
Hi Heather, I'm well. How are you?
I am doing okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quite enjoyed the time that we got to spend together at the conference, and I'll be asking you about that a little bit later. But why don't we start with some background about you in case there are folks watching who are not familiar with your activities. You wear a lot of different hats, so maybe you can kind of introduce yourself and tell us the sort of multiple things that you're currently working on.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. I enjoyed our time at in Charleston as well. So that was my first time, which I think we're going to talk about my experience a little bit. So I wear three main hats, I guess, maybe three and a half, depending how you count it. Um, I guess it's partly how I like to organize my life or have my life organized, and just kind of I like getting involved in various things. But the most relevant hat I wear for this conversation and for the Charleston meeting in general is that I'm the co-founder or one of the two co-founders of Retraction Watch. That was back in 2010 that Adam Marcus and I co-founded it. And I've continued doing that ever since in various ways and sort of, running things as executive director as a volunteer executive director of our nonprofit organization. Um, Retraction Watch, for those unfamiliar, does two main things. And one is that we publish most days, usually once a day, something, a story, a journalism story. We're a journalism organization about something happening in usually scientific fraud, scientific misconduct, scientific publishing, where it intersects with that, and sort of overlapping issues. But that's kind of not quite half of what we do, but a big part of what we do. The other big part of what we do is that we have a database of retractions, the Retraction Watch database, which was acquired last year, as we're speaking, last year meaning 2023, by Crossref, another, of course, I think organization that's quite familiar to Charleston meeting attendees. And that was a wonderful thing for various reasons. It made the data open and also gives us sort of sustainability on that side of our operation. Um, One other hat I wear that's relevant is that I am the editor-in-chief of The Transmitter, which is a publication here at the Simons Foundation, editorial independent, and it covers neuroscience for neuroscientists. We launched in November 2023, so we're a bit over a year old, and having lots of fun and doing all sorts of interesting things. And we do a little bit of work that actually recently a fair amount that overlaps with the subject matter in Retraction Watch, but it's obviously completely separate. Also here at the foundation, I am special advisor for scientific publishing, meaning that I sort of work with I work with the president on some initiatives, including, for example, funding the archive. That's been a major focus for the Simons Foundation for some time, and we've recently boosted that for various reasons. And then I guess the other thing I do, the third of the three and a half hats or what have you, is that I teach medical journalism at New York University, NYU, and I've done that for more than 20 years now. I teach graduate students and undergraduate students medical journalism, and I have a role there that gives me a very fancy title, but more importantly, allows me to, work closely with students on not just coursework, but some other sort of publications and what have you. And it's been a real home for me for a long time, and for which I'm grateful. So that's me and what I'm sort of up to at any given moment.
What's the half hat?
I suppose the half is the special advisor role here at the foundation. It's a part of my role, but it's not sort of what I was hired to do here. But that doesn't mean it's like an afterthought by any stretch. I just mean I wouldn't consider that a sort of full-time role, of course.
I imagine the children's story of the man who was selling the hats. It had all the hats on his head, but at the very top is a half hat that is hard to keep
Well,
up
the
with.
funny thing is, I actually really don't wear hats. My wife sometimes wishes I would when it's particularly cold or rainy. But I metaphorically,
Metaphorical
I'll
hats.
cop to wearing hats.
Great. Thanks for that. So you mentioned you teach medical journalism, and I know that your interest in journalism goes pretty far back. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that interest was born.
Yeah, it goes as far back as, I was when I was a cub reporter, I was riding around on the back of mastodons. Yeah, no, I wasn't. It goes back, about 40 years actually. And so when I was a kid, well, some background about my family. In my family, you went to medical school unless you didn't like the sight of blood. And I did end up going to medical school. I wouldn't say I like the sight of blood, but I don't dislike the sight of blood. I understand its requirement for life and all of that. And what that meant was that, we were encouraged, and that's probably a kind way to say it, but strongly encouraged to, study science and be pre-med even and to go to medical school, which again, I did all those things. But along the way, I developed a real interest in journalism, and part of what boosted that, what sort of prompted that was that there was someone there still is someone, but he's not in the role anymore, named Lawrence Altman, who was medical correspondent of the New York Times for 40 years. So sort of, during the time that I was first learning how to read newspapers and getting interested in that. And this, of course, was literally reading print newspapers. That's what we did in the, sort of 1980s. And so I thought it was pretty cool because here's Lawrence Altman. He's actually a trained, he's a physician. He's an infectious disease specialist that worked at the CDC actually before he went to the Times. He's a proper doctor. He's even allowed to use his MD on the front page of the New York Times, which the only the only person, I guess if there was another MD, they would have allowed it. But it was just kind of, and it was a way to bridge my interest in journalism, and specifically what turned out to be in science and medical journalism, science and health journalism, with, my family's interest, to put it one way, in medicine. And it was great. And he was a real role model. I've been in touch with him ever since, and not ever since. I probably didn't get in touch with him until I was in my maybe 20s. But he's very gracious actually, and I credit again from afar because I didn't know him or anything when I was an 11, 12-year-old. But I credit that kind of exposure to making me think, oh, you can do this sort of thing. Maybe not exactly the way Larry did it so successfully, but you can create a career that really combines both of those things. And so in terms of journalism, I got the bug quite early, like I said, and I was editor in chief of my high school paper. I was executive editor of my college paper. When I was in medical school, I was part of the sort of board. I think I was co-editor in chief of the medical student section of JAMA, which is where kind of the intersection of journals, part of journalism, if you will, and medicine and my interests sort of arrived, where I arrived at that intersection. But yeah, so it's been a long-standing thing, and I again trained in medicine, but decided at basically during my internship, and then finished my internship, and then decided I'm going to try this journalism thing full time. That was 25 years ago, as we're talking, and seems like it's working out so far.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a little bit about your teaching. You said you've been at NYU teaching for 20 years, and I just wonder changes you've seen over that time and why the students are interested in journalism, what they think journalism entails, because journalism has changed over that time. Just what kinds of trends have you noticed?
Yeah, so it was 2002 when I started teaching there, and obviously lots of things were different in 2002. The journalism industry, although right now it seems like in a particular, if you will, crisis or sort of downturn. Sorry to say that's unfortunately, maybe it's more acute right now, but unfortunately that's been a trend for a while. And not to be too much of a sort of Debbie Downer here, but I think that's not sort of a binary thing. That's sort of, oh, there's good news. There are better times and worse times, but so that part of it has changed, and I think it's something we need to think about. But I think there's some silver linings there in terms of specialty journalism. And so what I've always taught is again specialty. I teach medical journalism. It obviously relies on my having gone to med school, my expertise, but also my work in the field for a long time. But so I joined the Science, Health, Environmental Reporting program back in 2002, and until 2015, that was really the only course I taught was a medical journalism course, and for graduate students. And then since 2015, I teach undergraduates. So one change, which really more happened to me than sort of was something that students were changing, was learning, sort of the rich, but also very different experience of working and teaching undergraduates. Part of that is obvious, their age, and now a few years here and there doesn't seem like a lot in my life, but when you're 19 versus 24, there's a big difference there. The other is just what they're interested in. My graduate students have always been, and again, they've changed over time, of course, but my graduate students, they came there interested in science, health, environmental reporting, more likely environmental given the way the program is structured and all of that, and that's a wonderful thing. But they came there focused on that. This is what they wanted to do with their careers. Undergraduates, even if they're majoring in journalism, and the course that I teach in journalism is you can only take it if you're a major or a minor. They're really interested in lots of things, and so they see these as important skills to develop, but they're not necessarily interested in going to journalism full time. And that's actually, it's a little bit of a mindset difference. I mean, there's obvious changes that have happened. I mean, in 2002, we could rattle off together the social media platforms that didn't exist. I think that, Mark Zuckerberg was still in college, so he hadn't quite invented Facebook yet. Twitter hadn't, all of this hadn't launched. They came along fairly soon after that and started, of course, having an effect. There's all of that. There's, attention spans being what they are now, and they weren't then. I mean, the first 2 years I actually edited on paper, which I can't think about doing that anymore. That's kind of a weird thing. Red pen and the rest of it. But I mean, the consistent thing is that I learned from students, I'm sure at least as much as they learned from me, maybe more so. They bring things into the classroom, ways of thinking, specific technology and specific sort of approaches that, I mean, I'm not saying I don't deserve to be paid by NYU. I will, I think I do. I think I add value, but at the end of the day, the value is I'm basically taking all of that, experience and learning every year and putting it in, sort of, it's like tilling soil. You turn it into next year's syllabus, and it's been great.
Great. Are your students familiar with the work that you do on Retraction Watch in that space? Does that ever come up? Are they aware of that?
Yeah, it comes up in different ways. Look, when students, is particularly the graduate students who are choosing this program, right? So, and they're being recruited, and they're great candidates and the rest of it. But they do they do homework. Sometimes when I see, sort of they've expressed interest, even when they're visiting or something like that. So they certainly know about it, I think, and that's become more true. When I first started teaching, Retraction Watch didn't exist. Uh, we launched in 2010, so for the first 8 years, it wasn't a thing. And for the first few years, it wasn't that much of a thing, really. But they're aware of it. I do a session on it, and I also speak to other classes often who may or may not be my students, taking other courses. I end up guest lecturing, reasonably often around NYU and elsewhere too. And I think that there's a growing understanding that this kind of work, which I think of and I call accountability journalism in science and medicine, is more and more important. For one thing, I just think it's often more fun than sort of the sort of just, at least in my way of thinking, reporting on study of the week. But I also think that it serves a really important function, which I think a lot of other journalists are seeing. And so my students are aware of it, and some of them intern with Retraction Watch. We actually have hired a lot of my former students at Retraction Watch, not surprisingly. But it also, other, like, investigative reporters and editors has asked me to, give a seminar, webinar kind of thing. And so that's, I think it's making its way around the journalism universe.
Great. And for the one, two, or three people listening to this who are not familiar with how Retraction Watch, tell us a little bit about how it evolved from your initial conception of what you thought you would be doing with retractions to what it is today.
So when Adam and I launched Retraction Watch, we both had our visions were pretty similar. We thought this is interesting, and Adam had broken this amazing big story about one particular case of fraud that really opened my eyes to the fact that this was interesting. I mean, I knew, we all knew that there was fraud. We knew that the retractions existed, but okay, so what? I mean, this really opened my eyes. This guy named Scott Rubin, he actually went to federal prison for charges related to the fraud at one point. So this was a big deal, and I was just really impressed with how he was reporting. So I said to him, let's start a blog, and we both thought in different ways that we'd post maybe a few times a month, and that would kind of be it. Adam's actually quoted somewhere early on saying, "Yeah, we thought that we'd post a few times a month. There were just a few fractions a month, and our moms would read it, and then that would be enough for us." And obviously, we were wrong about that. We were happy to admit we were wrong about that. And so again, we were off to the races from day one, really. And so instantly we changed from that perception to posting every day and sometimes more than that, and realizing very quickly that we couldn't keep up. And so that led to a pretty significant evolution, really not until 4 or 5 years in, when some foundations approached us, which is always the kind of, dream, that sort of fantasy that I think nonprofits had. We weren't even technically a nonprofit at that point. We became one very quickly for obvious reasons. They said, well, we think you're doing interesting, great work. How can we help you? What do you want to do next? And so we said, well, I realized the world really needed a solid, good, comprehensive, and accurate database of retractions. And so we went about building that. We started building it really in 2015, and we launched it in 2018. So at that point, really, we were sort of not two organizations, but one organization with two kind of key projects, two pillars. And over time, we've added some other things. We have something called the Hijack Journal Checker, which we think is sort of both horrifying and useful at the same time. We've done partnerships. We do things like, testify in Canadian Parliament, committee and UK Parliament committee, and get involved in various things. We do some peer review even, which I think sometimes makes people do a double take. Like, what are these people who are writing about how flawed peer review is doing peer review? It's actually because I would say we're incrementalists and we believe in peer review. We just believe that it is deeply flawed, the way it's practiced. So, we do all sorts of cool things, and like we've got what I consider now a kind of stable budget. We'd always like to grow, but I don't like having to let people go or shrink. And so I think we've reached a point after some boom and bust years where I'm confident that we can, continue at our current pace. We have 4 full-time employees, and that seems like it's, again, like we're able to do not everything we want, but a good chunk of what we want that we think is important. And also I know where that money comes from every year. That's not a very exciting, sort of accomplishment. That's to just sort of say, hey, we're going to be around for a while. But I actually think it's maybe more important than some of the accomplishments that we could talk about or that other people talk about in terms, awards and things like that. Those are great, and you need them for various reasons. But being sustainable is difficult. It's probably more difficult than a lot of the other work that people try and do. And I'm pretty happy that we've gotten to this point.
Yeah, I think it's worth highlighting that because I've been in the open infrastructure space for a while, and a lot of times the shiny new toy gets the attention from the foundations for a while, but when it comes to sustainability, you might be kind of left out there. So it's not an insignificant accomplishment. I think that's amazing. Can you just explain the hijacked journal checker, because this is something I only learned about recently, and as you say, it's horrifying. But can you tell just a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So this, first and foremost, is a project by someone named Anna Abelkina, who's at the Free University in Berlin. Anna, she just does amazing work, fascinating work, again, kind of horrifying work, and in the best way, I guess. Sort of like a horror movie that you actually learn something from. Anna was named, for example, one of Nature's 10 for 2024, which is richly deserved, and I think hopefully will help raise awareness of her work, but just of sort of sleuthing and this kind of effort in general. So Hijack Journal is one where the journal, some unscrupulous as being kind, you could say fraudulent operator has taken over the operations of a legitimate journal using legitimate name. In fact, often using the URL. They actually sort of they pounce on the URL if you, as a small operation, maybe you're a single, maybe you're a scientific publisher, academic publisher, or an academic society that just has that's kind of one of the main things you do. But you're strapped like we all are, and you forget to update, or your credit card runs out, something like that, where people then pounce on it, or they do it in even worse, sort of more nefarious ways. And then they turn the machinery that you were using to bring in revenue or make profit, even depending on your structure, and they take that. And so what ends up happening is often they start publishing junk. They start publishing papers that have nothing to do with the subject. You'll have something about a small sort of important, interesting field in history, say, and all of a sudden it's publishing papers about physics or about COVID-19. Just completely, red flags should be popping out of everybody's eyes all the time. And so Anna has done a really careful study of this for years, and at the time we're talking, there are more than 300 titles on this high-tech journal checker, which we make available for free. It's just a spreadsheet, and people can check, like, okay, well, am I actually subscribed? Am I not subscribed, but it could be, but am I submitting to the right journal, the legitimate journal, or am I actually submitting to this hijack journal? And sometimes people call it cloned journal, and maybe that's a little bit more polite than hijacked, but it's fascinating, and we're so delighted to be able to partner with Anna to present that, and to also, not for nothing, but actually protect both Anna and of course ourselves, because we have structures in place in terms of the organization and governance, and also defamation insurance, which people out there in the field who are doing incredibly important work often can't get. It's not something an individual can easily get.
Yeah, and I know that sometimes librarians hear from researchers on campus who have inadvertently ended up, maybe with one of these nefarious journals. And I've even heard from publishers that journals that are lacking an article, the journal of sometimes are, in danger of this. So important thing to highlight. I want to move on to the Charleston conference, but I would be remiss not to ask just quickly the role that you're playing in helping to ensure that archive is sustainable. I know that that's very important to many universities, and particularly librarians in fields that are covered on archive. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the Science Foundation has always been very, proud, privileged, and happy to support the archive at a, substantial level, but sort of consistent with a lot, other funders and other organizations, as you probably know, and I suspect as sort of Charleston, members and attendees know, the archive as of now is part of Cornell Tech. It was part of sort of bigger Cornell, as part of Los Alamos before that, of course, founded by Paul Ginsparg, and he sort of brought it with him to various places. History is fascinating. I'm not going to dive into it too much, but what it became clear, and it's probably been clear for a while, but sort of became clear to us and to, I think, other people looking at this over the past several years, was that the archive needed to modernize in significant ways, and one key one was just literally moving to the cloud. So recoding everything, rewriting all the code and all of that to move to the cloud, and then actually moving to the cloud. There's other sort of, again, you might say they're sort of more boring things, but here I am talking about sustainability. Retraction Watch is the most exciting thing. It's like talking about infrastructure, but it is. I mean, the archive is absolutely critical infrastructure for the scientific, for science. And so not even just in the fields it covers, I think just by the fact that it exists, there's a lot of other value to that. And so we are looking, along with Cornell Tech and the various people there, we're looking at what is the best structure for this, and how can we help? What can we do to, ensure sustainability, ensure the archive's future? And we're very proud to be able to do that work. It's as we're sitting here, I have an archive hat sitting on my desk, which it's actually a kind of a
Which
collector's
you
item.
don't wear because you don't wear hats, but
No,
another story.
that's my archive hat. There you go. I'll get it. Just, as long as we're here,
We'll
I'll
have to take a
put on my
screen grab
archive hat
and show your wife that you
proudly.
actually have
There you
a
go.
hat. Looks good.
Um, since I keep my hair short, it doesn't mess up my hair when I do that. But anyway, so we're just it's a long-term commitment that we have and will continue to make at the foundation, and we also are in discussion, somewhat frequently with colleagues who are looking at similar issues. Chan Zuckerberg is of course looking at similar issues with Cold Spring Harbor Labs and bioRxiv and medRxiv. So I think uh, there's a real appreciation for how important this is for infrastructure. In fact, we worked with IOI, with Invest in Open Infrastructure, to help us understand, what the possibilities were and where we were with this.
So finally, I want to move on to Charleston. You said it was your first time there, and I know you had a relatively short stay, but how did you find it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was a short stay. Just it's one of those hats. It is literally about all the hats. I had to make sure to teach, and I had some other commitments and just days. I mean, Retraction Watch work, which is really what I was there for, is the vacation days from my regular job, and I don't say that to complain, but it just means I have to sort of think through things. So I hope one day I'll be able to really attend for the whole meeting and all of that. So I apologize for not being able to do that, unfortunately. But that being said, I had a wonderful time, and it was a little bit like. I don't know if you went to summer camp, but it was a bit like a little bit of a summer camp reunion for the folks that I met with. I had a wonderful, I hadn't actually, we've been in touch, of course, but I hadn't actually seen Richard Gallagher, who is, he's a dear friend, but he was my boss at the Scientist magazine for 6 years. Maybe he joined a little, anyway, 5 or 6 years by the time all is said and done. And he's just, he's a visionary, and being able to just reconnect with him and an actual real meeting, that was great. Elizabeth Bick, of course, I was privileged to be on a few panels with. She and I had a great meeting as well, and just the enthusiasm for and some of the criticism, in fact, which we welcome too, for the work that we do. I think it's a bit of homecoming, or again camp reunion kind of thing. Even if people may again criticize the work, it doesn't come from a place of it comes from a really good place, and it's sort of among friends, if you will, to have those kinds of conversations, and it was fun. I mean, and who doesn't like to go to Charleston? It's a lovely city, and I was very pleased. So I look forward to coming back.
Great. And I know you mentioned to me on the prep call for this that when it comes to Retraction Watch, the librarians were some of the first ones to kind of get it. I'm a big supporter for librarians. In your life, are there any sort of memories or formative experiences that were connected to libraries that you might want to share today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my very first job was actually working in a library, working as a page in a library, and I don't want to either retroactively accuse myself of any child labor law violations. I was old enough, but I can't remember if I was 14 probably, or 15, whatever the laws in New York State were. I'm sure everybody was following them. But I was a page, and I was on the books and everything else. But a local library. I grew up in a town called New City, New York, which is sort of on the west side of the Hudson, in Rockland County. And I was a page in the library, and I put away books and sorted things and did all of whatever a page does. And I mean, that was not the first I've obviously experienced. My parents, used to take us to, story hour and all of that. And so I spent actually a lot of, I knew that library very well before I started, working there as a page. And even that experience, one of the other pages, I remember, her mom was like a pretty senior, like research nurse, and she ended up basically setting me up with a job at a research facility, neuroscience research facility, also in Rockland County, and that was pretty formative for me, learning about lab work and all of that when I was still in high school. So I have very warm feelings for libraries, for librarians, as you alluded to. Librarians kind of got us, I think particularly the database, but even before that, they got us very quickly, and to the point where um, when I go out and give talks, and usually, and not usually, but often they're at universities, and obviously, maybe at a medical school or the main campus or something like that, a particular department. Somehow, librarians, of course, because they know how to find things out and learn things, they always show up. It's like they know about it, and there's like always a couple of them or even a row. And they're always, I wouldn't say they're asking the best questions. Everybody asks great questions, but there's a sort of level of nuance and a level of understanding that is really helpful to us. And we've also, they've helped us to a great extent. I went to, when we were first creating a database, and we sort of had this idea, and I think we even had funding by this point, and we're starting to work, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know my way around a database. And I didn't mean necessarily the software stuff and the coding, which we needed help with, but I was like, how do I mean, we're going to need a taxonomy. Like, I don't know how to do these things. I'm fascinated by it, but I'm a total amateur. So I, I went to like an open house, and I was already teaching at NYU, and I went to an open house. NYU um, does a sort of, maybe they, I don't know, I'm not sure if they still do it actually, but at the time they're doing kind of a combined program with another school that had like a very strong library program here somewhere in New York, I think Long Island. And I went to the open house, like you could get like it's kind of like built for people who, not for like undergrads or even grads, like people like me who are out working, and like you get an MLIS or something. Maybe it wasn't that degree, but basically that. And so we introduce ourselves, and I sit down with the director, and she says, "Well, why do you want to do this? Like, you have a medical degree already. You're teaching here. You seem to have a job and all that. Are you thinking about a career change?" I said, "No, I need to learn this stuff because we're gonna." And she said, "Well, maybe why don't you just? I mean, that's great. You're welcome to apply, but why don't you just hire one of our graduates?" And so I was like, "That's probably a better use of everybody's time and money." So we ended up not exactly doing that because somebody else who's still with us, who's our research director, had gotten a PhD in, like, with her thesis being about retractions, which I just couldn't find someone who was more perfect than that just by chance. Um, but we have for years relied on the kindness of strangers, as it said, in terms of people with this kind of, whether it's an MLIS or some, knowledge and expertise in that area, who work in libraries to help us and sort of troubleshoot and point out issues we have, but also like to sit down with us and like, well, what does this mean? Like, how are you structuring the data? So I have more than a warm, fuzzy feeling about libraries, about librarians.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing those reflections with us. It's been wonderful to speak with you today. I have learned a lot, and I do hope that we will see you at another Charleston conference in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for the interest and wonderful conversation.